jointly with our dear partner, FEMISE, and I will say about that. And second, because we are together thanks to your ideas and to your very beautiful, nicely written briefs, we are really trying to provide responses and ideas for the countries in the Mediterranean to respond to this unprecedented COVID-19 crisis. So the event, even though we are a small group, has tremendous significance for all of us. First of all, as I was saying, this partnership between the Center for Mediterranean Integration and FEMISE has tremendous potential. We always collaborated in the past, but now we have formalized this cooperation. And this is one of the products that we have put together to start with. Thanks to all your submissions, we are able to prepare this seminar, and we have many ideas for dissemination and perhaps a second call for proposals subsequently. It is obvious that we build on each other's comparative advantage. Your network, for me, is so well established north and south with so many prominent thinkers, especially from the south represented, and so many think tanks connected. We are delighted to be able to collaborate with you. And the CMI can offer, of course, not only the technical support and other advantages coming from the World Bank, but especially the participation of civil society in our platforms and our link between knowledge exchange and incubation of projects, which is something that the CMI has been involved for a while, but more recently, thanks to this initiative called the Dialogue of the Two Shores that was launched by President Macron, and for which the CMI is hosting a project platform. So I don't want to take too much time talking about the partnership, perhaps about the day. Constantine is going to be able to guide us through very well, but I just wanted to tell you that the papers that will be presented today are all extremely interesting, and we will be having a discussion, a dialogue. I will have more than a formal discussion comments, just questions for you to perhaps discuss or think about some ideas that you mentioned already in the brief, but that could be explored further, perhaps material for another brief later on. And I'm very much looking forward to the discussion. So now on to you, Ibrahim, Mr. El Badawi. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Blanca, and welcome everybody. I'm very pleased to represent FEMISE to say a few words on the occasion of this important CMI-FEMISE collaborative workshop. I would like to start obviously by thanking Paris for her effort putting this together, and also for keeping the FEMISE going through the tumultuous kind of transformation that took place. But we are very happy to have Constantine continuing to be engaged with us, and also Patricia. And we look forward to continue our collaboration with CMI and also the other relevant projects, especially in the post-COVID-19 debate regarding a range of issues, not only the issues that we are considering now, which are very important, the issue of technology, the environment, and the private sector, especially with regard to the transportation industry, but also the issue of regulation. A few days ago, I think the day before yesterday, Professor Daron Acemoglu gave a talk at the IMF, the prestigious Richard Good Fiscal Affairs lecture, which is given every year. And he talked about the importance of rethinking the entire approach to regulation of the high-tech industry, especially the digitalization industry, and the implications for the role of government and the emerging economy in the post-COVID-19. And I think this might be an area that we might want to consider, Blanca, for future consideration, having addressed now these three important topics. what I like about this project and about the organization of this meeting, the agenda, is it covers three important issues. It draws the implications of the COVID-19 for the people, economies, governments, and private sector, especially in terms of people, the women and youth in the Mediterranean. And then the second issue is to deploy the findings of the policy research, which we look forward to hear from the researchers, in order to inform a debate with the stakeholders. I think this is also another very useful approach in terms of the value of this project. And then the third is that in the context of this debate, it's not only drawing the implications, but also a forward-looking, taking a forward look as to what the economy of the post-COVID-19 would look like, and what are the main emerging agenda that needs to be taken into account. So I very much look forward to hear the presentation and the debate and the roundtables, and also take this opportunity to inform you that the ARF is also taken an important interest on these issues along the lines of surveys, telephone surveys in a number of countries from the MENA region, the southern part of the Mediterranean, looking at the impact of COVID-19 on the labor market, on the people of the region, especially the youth and women. This is from the micro labor perspective. And we are also launching two projects on the macro perspective, looking at issues of debt and fiscal sustainability, as well as looking at issues related to the role of sovereign wealth funds and the macro stabilization of the economies in the context of the implications of the COVID-19. So I think this is an issue that is very important, and we look forward to expand our collaboration, given the fact that CMI-FEMISE, and ERF, and many other research centers and institutions, they will be busy in the next year or so, assessing the impact of COVID-19, and also looking forward to see what should be the emerging agenda that needs to be taken into account. So without further ado, once again, I would like to thank you, Blanca, and the researchers, and Maurice, for making this happen. And we look forward to future collaboration. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ibrahim. So without further ado, we can move to the first session of this workshop, which is about financial reform strategies and the role of digitalization. So during this session, as with other sessions, we will have two FEMISE CMI papers that will be presented and discussed. Each presentation should last about 6 or 7 minutes. Discussants will then provide their comments, their questions, suggestions for future research, and then the authors will then have about 5 minutes each to reply. I also encourage the people participating to ask questions in the chat, and if there is sufficient time left, we can also address those questions. So with regards to this first session, as you all know, achieving growth as well as the SDGs requires to have massive investments in the Mediterranean, where the challenges are perhaps more significant than in other regions of the world, whether it be in terms of the fight against climate change, combating poverty, or reducing inequalities. And the COVID crisis is hitting a region that was already subject to strong economic, social, and political tensions. So what are the transmission mechanisms of the COVID crisis at work in the financial system? That's one question. Then the second question would be, what regional economic policies could allow the South Med countries to overcome this crisis, to access the funding that is required to respond to both short-term and medium-term challenges? Well, these are both the questions that motivate the first paper that we will have in this session. So without further ado, I will give the floor to Luis Reyes from Kedge Business School and member of FEMISE, who together with Thomas Laguarde co-wrote this first policy brief. So Luis, I will give you the floor, and you will have about 7 minutes to present your paper. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Constantin. So as he was mentioning, Thomas Laguarde unfortunately couldn't make it, but I am going to present to you some proposals for financial reforms for resilience in the Mediterranean. Next slide, please. So most of the things mentioned in this slide were already mentioned by Constantin, but there are some specificities in the region that distinguish these countries from other emerging or lower income countries. So there is a distinction between oil producers and exporters and those who do not produce or do not depend a lot on oil. Examples of this, of the former, are mainly Libya and Algeria, just to give you an example of how dependent these countries are of, let's say, this important resource. 60% of GDP is based in oil in Libya and about 40% in Algeria. So this is some specificity, and other countries, for this type of countries, and for others, of course, they are highly dependent on subsidies for the energy sector. So this strong slowdown in the price of oil in March and April, they were against all odds in not playing in favor of the former countries, and they left some leeway for the importers. Next slide, please. So the transmission mechanisms for the crisis in the region are listed here. So most of these have to do with the evolution of oil prices, but also the dependence with respect to the US dollar, both with respect to the oil price and with respect to the cost of financing. So during this period, during this first and second lockdown, there has been a strong rush to the US dollar that has appreciated the latter at the expense of other major currencies, and at the expense also, most importantly, of the economies of the region. So these developments, particularly the capital outflows that have been generated following the strong decrease in capital inflows, particularly of FDI in the region, have made foreign debt more difficult to honor. And of course, since the US dollar is still the dominant currency in the monetary system in the world, capital has been flowing the other way around than it should have been, or it should in general. Next slide, please. And so thank you. So there's a view whereby allowing exchange rates to fluctuate during this type of episodes where there is at the same time a devaluation of the currency due to the appreciation of the foreign currencies, and also during the slump. So there's been some adjustment processes, both that have to do with the real sector and the financial sector. And so here we see, for instance, just to take an example, the Israeli shekel, and just below the blue line here is the Algerian dinar, which depreciated strongly after the beginning of the lockdowns with respect to the dollar. Other currencies, for instance, the euro, which appears in yellow, depreciated slightly with respect to that currency, and then started its upward path. But of course, this depreciation of the domestic currency with respect to the dollar implies, if all these debts are denominated still in the dominant currency, the dollar, that means that they become more expensive without the countries running into higher and higher debt in terms of volume. Next slide, please. Some conclusions, and I'm going to try to wrap it up relatively fast because I only have 6-7 minutes. So our conclusions and our policy recommendations would be to create swap lines, for instance, with respect to the European Central Bank, which of course can, I am pretty sure these are already taking place, but this could be enhanced in this period where given the possibility of a US dollar devaluation starting next year, there could be some changes in the structure of the international monetary system that could go, that could benefit, or so we hope, the economies of the region. So in order for this to be, let's say, if it takes place in an orderly way, some other key currencies, for instance, the euro, the yen, or the yuan, or even the sterling, could be major currencies in which debts could be denominated. So this coupled with the lower profitability of US dollars, and and this coupled with international reserves, so to speak, in the form of special drawing rights managed by the IMF, if they give more weight to other currencies other than the dollar. So on the supply side of credit, we have other currencies taking a more important place. And on the demand side, when it comes to difficulties to honor debt and for stability of the exchange rate, special drawing rights could play a more important role. So this has been highlighted by Jose Antonio Campo, for instance, and other important authors. Then there could be also some regional cooperation measures for the regulation of capital flows, sorry, in order to prevent further devaluations. So we know that the region is particularly subject to these kind of episodes. And in order to couple this, there could be some regulation in capital flows that can stabilize currencies. And finally, and last but not least, there could be also the creation of a rating agency that takes into account also some ESG criteria, so that financial and non-financial risks can be taken into account. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Luis, and you actually did it in under 7 minutes, which is quite remarkable. Thank you very much for this very rich presentation, and for providing concrete ways forward to adapt to this new reality. And also transform recommendations that also contribute to transforming self-made economies. And speaking of transformation, then one of the things that we see following COVID-19 is the acceleration in digital transformation, one type of transformation, whether it be in education, in health, but also in the business strategy of firms who tend to adopt new technologies to support business continuity. However, to ensure that such business strategies are effective, one needs to make sure that consumers are also sufficiently educated with the use of new financial tools, digital payment, etc. And this is what motivates the next paper, which focuses on the need for digital financial education. Therefore, I will give the floor to Valeria Stefanelli and Marco Trinchetta from University of Salento, who will present their findings, and then we will be able to open the discussion with the discussants. So Valeria, just
yes, I'm
one
here. Thank
second.
You.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. The floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm Valeria Stefanelli, and I'm a professor in banking and finance at the University of Salento, so I'm from Italy. I'm very happy to be here with you, and I'd like to thank the two associations, so CMI and FEMISE, for this opportunity, and for appreciating the policy brief I wrote with Marco Trinchera and Vittorio Boscia. Marco is our PhD, so he's a PhD at University of Salento, and Vittorio is full professor in banking and finance at my university. So our policy brief is entitled A Digital Financial Education to Support the New Normal in the Post-Pandemic Era. Taking into account our time for presentation, we would like to point out our slide, starting with the purpose of our contribution, framing the scenario within which we work, and then moving on to the description of the recommendation and policy implications. In this light, our contribution is related to the topics about skills to develop a post-COVID-19 world. In our view, the COVID-19 pandemic has accelerated the digital transformation strategy in the firms in order to support business continuity despite the government restriction. However, the effectiveness of this business strategy depends on the familiarity and awareness of consumer with the use of online channels, and therefore with the use of digital payments necessary to conclude transactions in a marketplace or in an e-commerce space. So our contribution outlined a series of recommendations and aim at elevating and strengthening the degree of digital financial education on individuals to an accelerating of digital transformation in firm during the pandemic can counteract the socioeconomic effects of the health emergency. So Marco Trinchera will now illustrate the details of our work. Thank you for your attention.
Hi, sorry, I don't see the slide.
Hi, Marco. It should be in front of you. I'm sharing my screen right now. You should be viewing it.
Yeah, but I see the cloud of all presentation of slide, but don't have a problem.
Just one second. Let me try to fix this. Some technical difficulties. Okay. Can you now see my screen?
Yeah, but I don't see the slide.
Okay, just one second. Okay, perhaps you can share yours then. You can open the PowerPoint and share the screen because you're one of the hosts. Could you do this? Okay, perfect. Yes, we can see it.
Okay. Allora, in Europe, the latest survey of the Digital and E-Commerce Society Index highlights a strong disparity between North and South and greater digitization processes in Northern European countries. The level of digitalization of businesses is lagging in non-EU Mediterranean countries. In this country, in fact, instead of online and mobile payments, cash on delivery remains a primary mode of payment, constraining commerce growth. The existing literature states that there is a knowledge gap in financial education for young people, although they are important users of digital technology, but even more so for adults who have greater availability of wealth to spend. An OECD study finds high gender differences in financial knowledge, In 19 out of 30 countries, population evidence reveals significant differences between the percentage of men and women who meet the minimum target on financial knowledge questions, in particular for the non-EU South Med countries that have cultural and restrictive social norms. Since the start of the lockdown, marketplace or economic solutions have recorded exponential growth, particularly in the sale of basic necessities. With the reopening of stores in European countries, the development of internet sales slightly slowed down, but the level of sales is significantly higher than that of February. The Italian study conducted by Federdistribuzione and which can be generalized shows that consumers use cash flow for low amounts and take card for the highest amounts. Therefore, even those familiar with credit card prefer not to use them below a certain threshold. As regards the financial education of young people, they could be included in the secondary school program to teach the right and conscious use of smartphone and smartwatch to make payments, warning against possible risks that could be incurred with these technologies. So that these initiatives is not rendered in vain by the complexity of the topic. Young people's attention could be attracted through practical example or role-playing games or in the form of recreational activities. Another effective technique for reaching young audience is through social network, exploiting both the advertising space made available by the producer of the application, for example, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and exploiting the media power they so-called influencers. As far as the education of adults, awareness campaigns could be undertaken, exploring the television spaces intended for advertisement, or making ad hoc television program in time slot where the attention is greatest for this target of people. In this case, the messages should be as clear and simple as possible to attract the attention of older people. On the issue of gender inequality, advertising campaigns related to specific products intended for a female audience could be promoted. For this category, as well as for less well-off social classes, a favorable audience, a favorable or reduced tax policy, for example, tax relief could be promoted that uniformly spreads the use of digital technology in economy. So on the side of banking, on the business of bank and financial intermediaries, the government should implement policies that reduce the cost, the differences between accepting cash, accepting digital payments, thus approaching disadvantaged individuals closer to financial innovation. Finally, with regards to the south and east shores of the Mediterranean, it would be important for countries to have suitable regulators regarding personal data confidentiality and digital security to increase consumer confidence. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Marco, for your presentation. And something that I would like to add is that all the policy recommendations that you provided, even though they're mostly based on a study that focuses on Italy, you have drawn parallels in your paper with what is also happening in the non-EU Mediterranean countries, the South Med countries, and you've made sure that these could be, let's say, applicable to what is happening in the South, which is a positive thing. So without further ado, I'll now give the floor to the discussants, starting with Blanca, who have, I'm sure, some suggestions and comments as to your papers. Blanca.
Thank you, Constantin, for putting together this seminar and for guiding us through the different stages. And thank you to the authors for first submitting and then sharing with us your recommendations. It's not always that I have the chance to be a discussant since I am now a manager. That doesn't happen that often. So thank you, Constantin, for inviting me to play this role, which I'm delighted to play. So let me start with Luis. I was interested to read your paper because your recommendations are very ambitious and they are really worldwide global recommendations involving the IMF, the European Central Bank, and I thought it was a good beginning. Because the time is limited and it would take us probably much more than what we have to go over those recommendations that are of global nature one by one, I prefer to sort of direct you towards the case of the Euro-Mediterranean area, which is really the focus of our analysis. So I wanted to ask you if you could elaborate a bit more on what measures specifically could be taken in the Mediterranean. And in particular, you mentioned the creation of a Euro-Mediterranean environmental, social, and governance risk rating agency or a system, a methodology that would help guide investors, if I understand correctly, and how that could be done, what elements would be taken into account, knowing the poor governance of many southern Mediterranean countries. I thought this was a very novel idea, but I would really like you, if possible, to elaborate on that. And then more broadly speaking, I wanted to know if you had the chance to focus more on what the Mediterranean should do at the moment to block, sort of eliminate some of the blockages right now for FDI, because we know that it's going to drop worldwide by 40%. And in the Mediterranean, we know that it's one of the regions that attracts the least FDI in the world. So in the current context, this could be devastating if Mediterranean countries lose the little FDI that they were receiving. And I was just wondering specifically on that point, you have had the chance to look at any solutions, particularly at the regional level, because here we work on Mediterranean solutions to Mediterranean problems. So I was just wondering if you had the chance to focus on how this issue of having difficulty to attract the BI in the Mediterranean area could be resolved. So maybe I'll stop here. And do you want me, Constantin, to comment on the second paper first before I give the floor to the authors? Yes? Okay. I cannot hear you, Constantin, but I think you say to go ahead with the second paper.
Perfect, yes.
Okay, so on the second paper, thank you also for highlighting an issue that is actually very, very timely. And we observe a really deeper divide in terms of digitalization between the two shores of the Mediterranean. And you have focused on the case of Italy, but a lot of your lessons could be further extrapolated to include other Mediterranean countries. And I think that I would encourage you to continue this research further on the regional, landscape. What could be done to really reduce this gap in terms of financial digitalization in the Mediterranean, and especially to help entrepreneurs. Now, I was very curious to understand better the measures, some of the measures that you recommend, and please forgive me, I'm a fiscal economist, so I was going to pick on this. You talk about tax relief, and in particular, you made the link between tax relief and reducing the gender gap, the gender inequality. So I'm sure that idea came from your analysis. So I would like you to elaborate to tell us about, what kind of measures, why, how would they be designed, etc. And then again, I think what you propose is very good, but we know that in the Southern Mediterranean, we have network deployment issues, we have affordability issues, connectivity issues. again, on top of all those sort of, telecommunications slash financial affordability issues, on top of that, there is also lack of trust in the financial networks and therefore the predominance of payments in cash. So again, this is just to stimulate your thoughts beyond probably what you've done in this briefing. Just curious to know your opinions on this area, and then maybe I'll stop here and let the authors respond.
Simon, if you could also add your comments, and then we can start with Luis and then with Valeria and Marco. So Simon from American University in Beirut, the floor is yours. Simon?
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you, Constantin, for arranging this webinar, very interesting webinar. Thank you to FEMISE and the CMI. I have read with interest the two med briefs contributions, and they contain a wealth of information and how to deal with the current crisis that has been initiated by the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, which basically changed our lives, including not only the business environment, but also the educational environment. Now we have to all teach online. It's not only how to do business, it is about transforming all our lives, which became online. We basically do everything online these days. And the first brief does offer very good recommendations on how to move forward with our online life-changing environment, and how to make recommendations for government to educate the various layers of societies and have an informed digital financial education. The main problem in that setting is the fact that the way we do business and the way business is conducted in South Med countries is the fact that cash on delivery is still very popular. And the brief offers some solution as to how to educate the youth on moving into digital type of payments. And maybe the brief should have said something about the advantages of having a digital currency. Cash on delivery would still contribute to the transmission of the virus because of the fact that paper money can transmit the virus. And we know that many central banks nowadays are moving into digital currencies in the Med. There was talk at the Banque du Liban that they are in that process. Bahrain has moved into a digital currency. Bitcoins could be also a solution. I would have liked also to see in that brief more discussion about the current state of the nature in the Med countries. The focus of the brief is more on Italy. I think that the problem in the Med countries is the fact that they don't have access to the internet. They have connection problems. So more discussion on that side of the Mediterranean could be useful. So that's for the first brief. Now moving to the second brief, which is also very interesting and basically give us a broad macro quantification of what has been happening. The pandemic has initiated or triggered a recession. The Med countries had already its own problems, its own macroeconomic problems, debt and financial problems. I would have liked to see, since the brief talks about some sort of a perfect storm, some discussion about events unfolding in Lebanon, because Lebanon nowadays not only suffers from the already existing problems, financial and access to finance and access to capital flows. We experienced a sudden stop in capital. So we had already problems accessing international finance. We had already experienced a sudden stop in financial inflows. Then came the pandemic. And this is why Lebanon really qualifies as a perfect storm. It is not the pandemic that made things worse financially and economically in Lebanon, but it is only an addition to the already existing problems. So it would have been also, and we now have a problem to ensure funds from the IMF. We had a debt default. We have a devaluation of the currency, a currency crisis, a balance of payment crisis, a twin deficit problem. So I think that some discussion, maybe add a paragraph on on the events that has been unfolding in Lebanon, could also add to the brief, which in my opinion quantifies perfectly well the current situation and the need for Mediterranean countries to have access to foreign capital, be it through the IMF, the ECB, the European Union. I mean, French President Macron has already moved into, trying to have some capital into Lebanon. That type of help will be required in the next few months, not only to deal with the pandemic itself, but also to deal with our main problems here in Lebanon. Again, thank you. Very interesting briefs. Thanks for the author. Well written, with a wealth of information. Thank you, Constantin.
Thank you very much, Simon. Thank you for your comments that are always to the point. I would like to tell you that you'll be delighted to know that in the third session, which focuses on country-specific implications, we will have a brief that is dedicated to Lebanon. So stick around, and I'm sure that you will find it interesting as well.
Good to know. Thank you.
Thank you. I will give the floor to the authors, but first I will also add a small question to Louis. Louis, since you're talking about SDGs a lot and about how FDI is always needed to relaunch transition towards SDGs, I think you know that Egypt recently launched the first green bonds in the MENA region. They were worth about 750 million to finance expenditures that are related to green projects. So I would like to know, perhaps you can share with us in what way you think this type of green bond support can boost the economies in the Mediterranean. How can Mediterranean countries in general best utilize those financial instruments? Do you see potential in other countries? So yeah, let's hear Louis first. You have about 5 minutes, followed by Marco. Louis.
Thank you, Constantin. So thank you for the comments by Blanca Moreno Dodson and Simon. So the first question that I recorded here is about the Euro-Mediterranean relationship, and so I think this is related to what Constantin was mentioning about the Green Bonds initiative. I think the relationship between the European continent with respect to the southern Mediterranean countries can be enhanced in a way to guide investment positively, meaning to decarbonize investment and to make it more resilient, both with respect to climate issues, mainly with respect to being less dependent of fossil fuels, both fiscally and with respect to the productive apparatus, but also this would make them more resilient financially, both because green investments are perhaps more viable nowadays, knowing that we don't know how long the fossil fuels are going to be out there, and we know for sure that they have created a lot of instability. So the partnership between, let's say, institutions like the European Investment Bank, who is already present in the region, or other related institutions, could be fostering this type of greening of investment, both by investing in, by helping them investing in green energies, renewables, hydrogen, It could be also other forms of electrical appliances or other that the creation of energy in general that does not use these type of fuels that are very present in the region. And this is related to also something, related to the ESG criteria, precisely. So financial performance is very important when it comes to profitability, but we know for sure that from a climatic perspective, from an environmental perspective, this is not profitable for anyone in terms of health, in terms of sustainability. And so SDGs, including the fight against climate change, can be enhanced using this type of criteria that would be supervised by an authority, an international organization, eventually the ones that we already know, the Bretton Woods institutions. And so FDI could be also very important to be directed in the region, coming from Europe, knowing that it is the second largest contributor of FDI in the region after the Gulf countries. And so this FDI could be used in the key, let's say, sectors that would allow both employment and growth to be enhanced in a sustainable way. So these are basically our thoughts on this. And of course, this closeness between the south and the north of the Mediterranean could come about not only by making them both more, let's say, closer, but more responsible with one another. So that's why we promoted the use of capital controls in order to guarantee stability of both the exchange rate, but the exchange rate is not in itself the goal, but the stability of the funding, that when it comes, when it goes, and so on. And so in order to guarantee the stability of growth, of capital flows, of the stability, how jobs are created in all this, there should be some form of enforcement on the financial side. So these are just some thoughts. And so green projects in Egypt are just definitely good news. And I am looking forward to hear more, hopefully good news about this partnership. I am pretty sure it's going to be good. There are some risks as well, the probability of green bubbles. But if there is the proper handling of it via financial macroprudential policy, I'm pretty sure this could be good.
Thank you very much, Luis. Marco, the floor is yours.
Hi. So, in order to remove gender differences, a different percentage of cashback on purchases could be emphasized to incentivize categories who are reluctant to change to use digital payments. Help could come from raising the threshold for contactless payment from 25 to 50 euros, announced by the banking system. Even more decisive could be the push that will come from the mechanism the Italian government is adopting to support consumption, a cashback system on digital payments. On the side of differences on south and south region of the Mediterranean, currently the South and East Mediterranean is the area where the population's confidence in personal data is the lowest in the world. Financial intermediaries and banks should put in place effective information solutions aimed at the various users of digital payments, also to protect the consumers from the risk of computer fraud or internet security. In addition to providing internal security mechanism for the payment system. Also, an international scientific committee could be set up, composed by members of members from various countries, which together with the various international institutions would promote a common economic digitization strategy in the Mediterranean based on exchange of ideas, experiences, virtuous programs, and education cross-country initiatives. And fine, thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Marco, for your answers. I also see that we have some questions in the chat, and actually one of them acts as a perfect transition for the next session, and it comes from our friends from IEMED in Spain, so Roger Albiñana, who says that a question that is perhaps best addressed to the next panelists. He has the impression that in terms of policy reforms, there is a gap between rhetoric and actions, and so he would like to ask, do you think that the post-COVID might help diversify South Med economies, especially those that basically depend on hydrocarbons production and export? Or do you think governments might pursue a certain comeback to the status quo? So this could be something perhaps that the next session can address, that focuses on also the environmental policy landscape in a post-COVID world. It will be moderated by our good friend Stéphane Poufari from Energy 2050 and member of FEMISE, together with discussant Stéphane Kefelec from the European Environment Agency, and our own Frédéric de Dinchin from CMI, who is the CMI World Bank expert on issues related to mitigation, adaptation, mainly related to climate change. So, Stéphane, je te donne la main. Stéphane Poufari.
Okay, so I hope it's working. It's fine for you?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly.
Okay, so something perfect. So thank you again, CMI and also FEMISE. So it's a very good initiative to try to put some policy brief on these challenging issues about the recovery post-COVID. So this is very important, and I'm more than happy as member of FEMISE also and as partner to be part of the story. So I think the second panel is very challenging at the end, because as the question raises the point, it's a question of how to transform, let's say, the theory and the perspective in concrete action, and to see if it works. And also because also before the COVID crisis, we were challenging already some very significant crises. And one among others is the climate change, SDG also, poverty, and many additional points. So I really think this is a point to discuss and to think how we can, let's say, transform our vision into concrete activities. I just want to mention one word as an introductory, is that we all know that between the recovery plan, so far, we have quite a significant part of this plan, which deliver, let's say, a very bad and potential locking effect in environment and climate and SDG. So at the end, this is something very as a constraint, and we really need to be, let's say, very vigilant to see if it's, let's say, the commitments have a chance to be on not only rhetoric, but also to be concrete action. So now I will open the floor to the two panelists. So the first one is from Aix-Marseille School of Economics, our friend Vera Danila, and she will speak about policy response to environmental challenge of COVID in this area. And I will try to project your slide. Hopefully it will work. Otherwise, I will do my best to ask someone. So,
okay.
Vera, the floor is yours during that time.
Okay, thanks a lot. Hello, everyone. First of all, let me thank you again for this wonderful opportunity to be a part of this webinar. That is extremely interesting, and I think it's also one of the topics we should be focused on, taking into account all the challenges of the COVID. So as Stefan already mentioned, my story is about environmental challenges of COVID that we need to face in the Southern Mediterranean region. The main idea of this analysis was to check, to see, to provide some insights, some ideas, what can be done in the short and middle term perspective, taking into account what we observe now is the first outcomes of the COVID and that might come in a while. Would you please, next slide, Stefan, if possible? Thank you. Yeah, thanks a lot. So the policy brief is focused on the Southern Mediterranean region that, as you see on the slide, registered about 22% of the total COVID cases. And it was, as everywhere in the world, hit by the pandemic. But I need to say that according to what I observe in different countries, the region responded fastly and severely in terms of introducing different limits and restrictions, trying to protect their population, trying to protect people from the COVID threat. At the same time, we all observe a set of different positive and negative outcomes of this situation. And in terms of environmental perspective, the positive outcomes, we need to mention, first of all, the sudden reduction in emissions, what we observe all over the world, including the region, as well as noise and waste reduction due to lack of activity, no migration, no tourism as well. But obviously, these positive outcomes were outtaken by their negative outcomes. The most important thing is the economic recession and the income decline we'll observe in this region, and poverty increase, and for sure, what we call the first signs of deglobalization, thinking about their decline of international economic activity, both on the way of moving people, but also on the way of any other international projects that get slowed down or closed completely because of the COVID restrictions. The difficulty of this COVID reply in this region, what I see first of all is because this region is very heterogeneous in many dimensions, including social economic dimension, including climate dimension, including policy dimension. And on these huge differences between countries, we would mention on the one hand, the countries who are suffering most from the COVID is Libya and Lebanon, for example. And on the other side, we see Egypt, who's kind of is expected to escape the recession. So next slide, please. So taking all this into account, what I was trying to do, I was trying to put together the analysis of the region using the well-known mechanism, well-known approach of SWOT analysis. Here you see this the table that I was actually working through. So what I did, I just take first the picture of the region, taking into account the strengths and the weaknesses of the development in the region on the one hand, and then I took the opportunities and threats coming with COVID pandemic. So then putting all this together and trying to matching everything, like for example, matching strengths and opportunities, that gives me a possibility to check the strengths of the countries that can be reinforced by the opportunity coming from the pandemic, post-pandemic world. If I match the opportunities and weaknesses that we observe on the country development, we see some kind of loss the countries can observe because they're not able to use the possible opportunities. And then we come to threats, which we can fight against with our strengths, or threats that can be really critical for the economic development, taking in account the weaknesses. So that's the main scheme of the story. And now let me show you the result of the analysis. Stefan, would you please go to the next slide? So here are the results of the analysis. So let me go through from strengths and weaknesses of this region. So what I found the most important is that on the part of the strengths, this region has a huge economic potential that was actually proven already by economic development in different countries and stable inflow which we observed, for example, in Algeria or Tunisia. At the same time, we observe here as well solid steps towards sustainable development, and many countries like Israel, for example, or Tunisia as well, we observe well-developed, well-sounded environmental policies. On the other hand, on the terms of the weaknesses, we definitely see silent ecological threats in the region that comes with the lack of access to water, to clean water in some parts of the area, and kind of moderate environmental concerns. According to the last information I found, only about 30% of respondents who were asked is ecological development is kind of important. They say only 30% think that is most important for the economic development of the country. Obviously, in terms of weaknesses, we think about social economic heterogeneity, I've already mentioned that, and as well as environmental policy heterogeneity. So how these strengths and weaknesses can fight or can be, again, get weaker because of the opportunities and the threats coming from COVID. So what are the opportunities of COVID? It probably sounds a bit strange, but still we can observe some opportunities because COVID is a crisis. And economists will always think about crisis is not something that is going down in terms of economic development, but also we see it like the possibility for renovation, for reorganizing the structure, and for restarting the economy on a better, more efficient way, in this case, probably more environmental friendly. So this is the opportunity, the most important opportunity that might gives us the possibility to facilitate the innovation and to change the consumers, because during the COVID, obviously some consumers realize how important it is to have a chance to go out, to go to the nature, to buy what we need in terms of the going to the tourists, to travel, etc. So this is the opportunity part. And on the threats part, definitely for sure, it's economic recession coming with their COVID, public spending increase, and as I also mentioned, the globalization. So putting all these four things together, I come from the best possibilities for the countries to the worst to the most dangerous part. On the best way, on the side that is the most interesting is that they can match strengths and opportunities by saying that this is a good moment for the government to foster the green technologies, because we are in some sense we're restarting the economy. By restarting the economy or restarting after post-COVID world, why not to use this opportunity to put a pay special attention to green technologies. On the other hand, this opportunity might be not taken completely by the countries into account, because this possibility might be stopped some kind by a refraining obstacle that are the socioeconomic problem we observe in the region, including with political instability. On the other hand, the strength of the region allows also, when going to the second line of the table, to fight against threats. I told about economic recession, about deglobalization, but it also might be a possibility for the countries to develop their internal economy, because we are now observing a slowing down in international development and trade for sure, but that might give us what we're saying, going local policy to go to the front. It means that this decreasing competition for a while coming from abroad might allow the inside investors of the country, national investors and local producers to take over and to get stronger to fight against the international competitors in a while. And for the last thing, what I want to mention is obviously the weaknesses and threats, and this is the most difficult and most dangerous part, because we also see with this economic recession and stagnation, we actually observe the aggravation of existing economic problems, socioeconomic problem, and for sure environmental problem. And we observe that in some countries, we also see this decrease in environmental activity we observe in the policy. Okay. Sorry, Stefan. So to conclude, this is the most dangerous point that we can observe. So next slide, please, and I'm done in 30 seconds or even 15. So what the main implication here is trying to support the national producer, first of all, trying to put at the front environmentally friendly public policy science, and trying to support the local enterprises, first of all. And the most important thing that all these should be taken into account, because we know that all we're doing now is important for new generation, and about 30% of all population is children and teenagers in the region. So what we're doing right now, that's what they will have in 5, 10, 15 years. So thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Vera, and it was very interesting. And just before giving the floor to the next panel, I just want to invite the ones who raise your hands to please go to the chat, like that we can have a track about the, let's say, and to involve you in the discussion, even with the authors after the webinar. So please do so. So now I want to introduce the next 3 authors, because at the end they have a co-paper. And they have provided some, let's say, documents about the transportation-oriented policy. So it's more focused than Vera, but it's very interesting also to see how we can imagine something to be, let's say, practical enough to change the patterns. So I give you the floor. I don't know who will be the first one, Beste, Linus, or Armin, whatever. And I will try during the times to give your slide.
Yes, thank you very much. This is Armin Wagner from GIZ, and I'm going to present our work. Can you hear me?
Sure, yeah.
Sure, okay, so I'm waiting for the slide. Okay, good, thank you.
Sorry for that, it's all the time on it. It's okay, no, it's fine. You have the floor.
No worries. So first of all, a big thank you to CMI and FEMISE for organizing, on the one hand side, the preparation of these papers, and on the other hand side, for organizing this webinar. This is a very important debate, and it's I like the very cross-cutting approach, discussing high-level macroeconomic questions, and also very down-to-earth issues like transportation. So I'm presenting here our joint paper. It was prepared by my colleagues Beste, Linus, and me. I'm working here at the GIZ, the German International Cooperation Agency, and we are hosting the Transformative Urban Mobility Initiative. If you would mind to just go to the next slide. So from our perspective, and I think this is obvious for most countries, the COVID-19 crisis has had has still a big impact on many countries and cities, in particular in terms of travel. So we are all aware of the pictures, the early pictures from the crisis, with people being stuck in airports somewhere, with closed down transit systems and limited travel. In the meantime, in most countries, the situation is normalizing. But what we are observing is that there are basically 3 types of response to the crisis. And I'm borrowing here from Brent Todarian. He used to be a transport planner in Canada, and he's a big advisor. And he actually identifies 3 types of cities. So the first category of cities is do-nothing cities, except to refine the ability to make excuses. Then there are cities who do something reluctantly, but only consider a temporary perspective without a future lens. And then there are cities who are doing temporary improvements connected to permanent legacies and change. And I do like this approach, because it is not an approach discussing various regions of this world, being North or South, or as the Mediterranean, or Asia, or Africa, or Latin America, but actually the way how cities and countries are responding to this crisis. And the interesting thing from this crisis is that there are a set of cities globally, in particular also in the global south, who have used this crisis as an opportunity to develop a transport system, or to start to develop a transport system which is more just, which is cleaner, which will result in less traffic jams, which will result in better access to services and transport opportunities. So please go to the next slide. And this fits pretty much also in our paradigms, avoid, shift, improve approach. So from our perspective, the question of transport and mobility, and also the question of responding to COVID-19, is pretty much linked to the question how the future of our cities should look like. On the one hand side, we need to focus on reducing the demand for motorized travel through better policies. This is in general terms. And during the COVID crisis, we need to reduce the demand for travel by offering additional opportunities for work from home, flexible work schedules, virtual conferences, all types of local services. And on the other hand side, of course, we need travel bans and restrictions in order to reduce the travel demand and reduce the infection risk posed in our transport system. The second dimension on a more long-term level is a shift to cleaner modes of transport and faster modes of transport like public transport, walking and cycling. And during the COVID-19 crisis, it means that we need to offer more space for pedestrians. We need to offer more space for public transport users by offering higher frequencies, by offering priority schemes for essential workers. So in the crisis which we are facing now, we need to offer the quality services for those who need it most, and the other ones need to stay back home and or travel at other times. And the third dimension of our paradigm is improve dimension. So we need to improve the quality of the overall transport system, is the cleanliness of the system. And this is also, of course, overlapping with the shift. And in terms of the COVID crisis, we have seen many approaches of better sanitation and cleaning of public transport, free bike sharing schemes, for example, for essential workers in many places, better demand management in order to stagger demand over the time, to avoid morning rush hours, for example. And we have seen many approaches, and then we can also skip to the next slide. We have seen many approaches introducing contactless ticketing, for example, new work policies in order to provide less, or in order to ensure less demand for public transport. And we have seen many open streets approaches in cities where streets have been closed for private cars, but open for people, for pedestrians, for walkers, for public transport users, in order to provide more space for physical distancing. And we have seen in many places, and this is a good sign, bus priority schemes. So by running buses on dedicated lanes, for example, with priority at intersections, we can offer higher quality, we can offer more space with the same number of buses, with the same number of drivers, and with the same financial outlay. So these are all the good things happening. And as I said, there are three categories of cities. Some of them are stronger in capitalizing these developments and others are weaker. And one important issue is, of course, also digitalization. So all the use of, as I said, contactless ticketing, better information for travelers, and so on. So please, the next slide. So, and if we look at the future, and where I also introduced it with a better focus on the MENA region, we also again need to look at the avoid, shift, improve paradigm. So if we look at the future, and if we want to use the opportunities which this crisis is offering, so we need also in future to look at the promotion of compact and human-centered cities. Without this type of cities, we will not emerge stronger from this crisis. We need to promote remote working and learning opportunities. There's so much happening, and in particular, given the very young population in the Mediterranean region, this whole issue of remote learning, blended learning, hybrid learning can have a huge impact on transport demands. This is something we need to support. In terms of shift, we of course have to continue to increase the provision of quality public transport, quality public space for people. Otherwise, we are going to end up also after the crisis in traffic jams. We are going to be stuck in traffic jams in the region, and we need to restore confidence in public transport by making it cleaner, contactless travel from A to B. And the quality of public transport is, of course, pretty much also looking at bonuses for sustainable mobility solutions, linking the promotion of transport and green recovery also to CO2 mitigation. And as we are facing, of course, not only a climate change crisis in the region, but also an adaptation crisis in the end. So the region will become hotter and hotter. So how can we use the opportunity of building back better, also to build cities which are not heating up, cities which are greener, and cities which are of higher quality of life. So this is a very rough snapshot of our thinking, how on the one hand side we can use our avoid shift improve paradigm to mitigate the impact of COVID-19 in the transport sector, but also to use it as an opportunity to look into the future, how we can build back better in order to make cities in the region better places to live in. Thank you. So I will skip the last slide.
Okay, thank you for your presentation, and sorry to to urge you because we want to be online on time. So now, before I will ask my direct question, I will leave the floor to Stefan Kefelec to be the first, let's say, discutant, and after also to Frédéric de Dinekin, and after we will open the floor to discussion. And please, as Vera is more or less obliged to leave us, if you can address first the question to Vera, it will be very fine. And the second round of questions can be addressed to Harmin and also more broadly to be discussed. Thank you, Stefan.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Thank you for inviting me, Constantin. I will provide some comments, questions, and suggestions in 3 steps, with a general comment and the first question first, then some specific comments related to climate change aspect and to the European perspective, plus 1 question. And then I will come with a suggestion for a future research area. The general question and comment first. I agree, when I read the 2 papers in a row, I think they fit very, very well together. And Stefan mentioned it before, because in particular, there is a large share of air emission, greenhouse gas and local air pollution, which is decreasing fast during the lockdown because the transport emissions are decreasing fast during this period. And one question which came to my mind after the reading is that I don't see much discussion about tourism and about international transport by sea in the 2 papers. And I wanted to know if this is deliberate, or if it's like you found it not relevant in this context, or if it's because it's part of another research project. And now I come to my second point, more specific and climate change related. I think one risk we should not ignore is actually that after this COVID pandemic, we see a very huge rebound in emissions, in greenhouse gas emissions, as we have seen after the 2008 crisis. And that actually the COVID pandemic resulted in delaying by a few years the emission pathway we need to reach the objective of the Paris Agreement. That's one risk. Nevertheless, as you said in your written in the paper, how much we are going to persist with the different positive changes, the positive experiments, the good habits, and the mentality change that we have adopted during the pandemic, and how the recovery plans and the long-term strategy for low-carbon economies are designed and integrated together. These 2 factors, the persistence of the good habits we have taken during the pandemic, plus the way and the shape of the design of the recovery plans, are the 2 factors that can accelerate the transition to a low-carbon economy. The question is now, to my opinion, is why this time this should work better than in the past. And I think one answer is that the situation is very different, because we have the Paris Agreement, which has been adopted, and this is a framework was not there in 2008. Remember the failure of the 2009 negotiation in Copenhagen. And maybe more important, the Paris Agreement, it has been translated at the EU level into what we know now the Green Deal, and in the Mediterranean countries in the NDCs, the National Determined Contribution. And it's important, I think, to really understand that the EU Green Deal, it's the strategy for the European Union, the economic growth strategy for the European Union for the next 4 years. And I think there is 4 main differences that we can highlight today compared to the experiment we have seen in the past. The first is that the ambition is very, very high, much higher than before. First, of course, it's climate neutrality by 2050. And also The biodiversity aspect is at the heart of the Green Deal. That's a very important point. Second point is the Green Deal is not a sectoral plan. It's not a sector plan. It's a plan which is very integrated and very consistent. It covers all the sectors of the economy. And third, the social justice is included is at the heart of this plan. And maybe last point, there is a clear connection between the stimulus package at EU level and the Green Deal. And that's, I think, what we need to keep in mind. The Green Deal is actually used as a basis for the EU recovery plan. And that's make a big difference. We have the momentum. This time we have the political vision and we have the consistency in the political package. And I think it's very important for the Mediterranean area because this package could be applied to the entire Euromed region, very inspiring actually for the region. And because the Green Deal specifically stipulates clearly that the participation of the neighboring countries is part of it. So I think this is very, an opportunity also for the Euromed region as a whole. And I think I keep always in mind that several assessments shows that why, even if not perfect, the Euro-Mediterranean cooperation, in the area of environment, of climate change, of environmental information, they gave quite strong push at national level to environmental policies. And also they are, let's say, a factor for improving the integration at the regional level. So my second question is like, why I don't see in the, and maybe it's more for the Vera, the paper from Vera, I don't see any discussion about this Euro-Mediterranean cooperation in your paper. Perhaps it could be considered, or maybe you have considered that it's not relevant, and that's my question. And maybe now my last point, very quickly, about the future research. I think one key topic is the social dimension of the climate change policies, and in particular, the distributive impact of climate change policies and their implication in terms of inequalities. Just say very briefly why. It's because for the transition to happen, the climate policies and the carbon prices need to be massively and very quickly deployed now in the region. But this has cost and benefits, and this cost and benefit of these policies, they do not distribute equally across the different countries, the different regions, and the different social groups within the country. And I think the most negatively impacted communities, they really need to be considered specifically in order not to increase existing inequalities. And maybe lastly, this is a condition also for ensuring that the policies are accepted and supported by the citizens, which is in the end a key criteria, or let's say a key factor for the policies to deliver the result we expect from them. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, so sorry, Vera. Hopefully you will stay with us 5 or 10 minutes less. I will give the floor to Frédéric de Dinekin also to give your question. Like that, Vera can answer both of you.
Okay, thank you, Stéphane. Thank you, Constantin. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect. You can go.
Okay, first, I would like to say that I very much appreciate the comments made by the previous speaker, and it gives us a very good overview of what is at stake. I would like to make 2 words of introduction and 2 words of caution. The word of introduction is, I think these papers are extremely relevant, and dealing with this issue in the Med region is particularly relevant. Why? One, because we just got the MEDEC report published, which is the report prepared by the Mediterranean experts on climate and environmental changes. And this report is a scientific report, and it's clear about the fact that the Med region is warming 20% faster than the global average. So this makes really a lot of sense to deal with these issues. And COVID, again, we recently had a report published by the World Bank to assess the impact of the COVID on extreme poverty. And in the MENA region, which is part of the Med region, there will be more than 2.8 million new extreme poor, which means at less than 1.9 US dollars per day. And this will include new poors, new extreme poors, especially in urban areas. So I think dealing with climate change in the context of the COVID is really relevant. Now, I would like to make 2 words of caution. The first one is that we are already talking about the post-COVID area, but we are still in the middle of the crisis. The vaccination campaigns have started today. In the UK, we don't know where we go. There are still a lot of uncertainties. And I think we have to be extremely careful because we still don't know what's going to happen. We don't know if there won't be another disruption within 6 months, another COVID. So I don't want to be too alarmist, but I think we have to be extremely careful. And I think I appreciate the fact that the 2 papers are very pragmatic. And I think in that context where there is a lot of uncertainties, this is important. And the second word of caution is that we do not have reliable data. We don't have reliable data on infection and death with regards to COVID. And we don't have so many reliable data in terms of climate change with regards, for instance, to the NDCs and the targets which have been put by the different countries. And that's unfortunate. That's a critical issue. And that's something we have to take into account. I think in terms of infection and death, data are definitely underestimated in many southern and eastern Mediterranean countries. And in terms of climate change, again, we are far, far behind the targets of the Paris Agreement. We are far behind. We can announce whatever we want, but if we want to reach, as it was indicated by the previous speaker, the zero net carbon emission by 2050, we have to wake up and we have to act quickly. So now I will go to the 2 papers. The first one, thank you, Vera. I really appreciated the SWOT approach. And I think this could be piloted at a country level. It would be great. I also particularly appreciated the conclusion on the importance to develop intergenerational justice. I think that is key. And I think that is key also in this, with respect to equity and how you will be able to move forward difficult reforms. Now I'm going to make a few comments, five comments. The first one is in the opportunity. I think the regionalization of value chains could be a great opportunity for many regions in the Med region. And I think that's something that could be maybe developed. I also think that we may there's a risk that country may focus more on food security, food sovereignty, and that could have an impact on the entire agriculture sector. And that's something which we have to follow carefully, because we may see that in the northern part of the Med region, but we may also see that in the south and east Med countries. I very much appreciate the point on green technology and more broadly on ITC. I think this is definitely a great opportunity for these countries, for our countries, and to jump the gap and to avoid the kind of mid or intermediary step or stage that other countries had to follow. And 2 last comments. I think that we have to develop a little bit more on the circular economy models and to see how this could be applied in many Med countries, whether it is for the, let's say, inland activities, but also for the on-sea activities. I think there are great opportunities, and this is a win-win process. And finally, I would say that there is an issue, and it's to address the question, where is the money? We have to develop new approaches in terms of funding mechanisms. And I think the involvement of the private sector has to be rethought. I think, for instance, in the sector of water, the PPPs could be something that could have a potential to compensate the lack of public money. Now, for the second speaker, I'd like to go quickly to a few questions and a few points. It's a clear paper. I like the fact that it's a team who prepared the paper. The ASI approach is good. I like a very innovative and pragmatic approach, like the pop-up bike. I think we could try to do that in Marseille. Let's try. Now, I think I like to raise 5 points. First, you adhere to the green stimulus package in your paper, and you say that it's a win-win process. And I think that's key. We have to show that the Green Deal, we have to show that all these pro-environment and climate change reforms are going to benefit the entire range of the population. We are talking about equity, and I think that's extremely important. And that's true. You can create jobs with these new approaches. Now we have to deal also with all the old assets. It's great to move to the bikes. It's great to move to other kind of innovative approaches, but there are assets which have been implemented and invested in, and so this is something which has to be dealt with. Two final comments. I think, and the previous speaker also raised that issue. I think that there should be some kind of additional work on tourism and what do we do with that sector and tourism and air transport, which is not really developed in that paper. I understand it may be on purpose. And finally, like for the previous paper, I think the youth component is extremely important. And I think if there is something we could develop in the future is to bring the youth approach in all these papers, because definitely, especially in the South and East, this is a key issue. It's both an opportunity and also a challenge. Thank you, Stefan. Over to you.
Okay, I was urging you also because I know that, okay, I will not go too much in detail because I think both of you already say many things. And just before giving the floor to Vera, I just want to say that maybe to add to Stefan and your question, I think what is very important is to ask as a prerequisite to this kind of paper, why this time it may work. Because I think we need to focus on co-benefit approach. Otherwise, it will be very complex, especially regarding finance, because we know that main part of the finance is also domestic finance. And usually as part of subsidies, for example, in fossil fuel and many different topics, they are creating locking effect. And we have a very good example in this area as Morocco, which is so far the first country which revised its INDC. And this is the only ones maybe which is part of the tracks to be on the 2.2 plus 2 degree. So just to say that at the end, it has also to be a policy drive at the national level. It is not only a way to collaborate. And the only question we need to demonstrate is if they do something, what can be the co-benefits on all the different agenda they are supposed to work on. INDC, SDG, gender issue, poverty, and all this food security, water, whatever. So I think this is very important, and I will not go too much in detail because time is really running out. I will give the floor to Vera first to try to answer. And
thanks
for the organizers, we switch 5 minutes beyond.
Thanks a lot, but I actually really need to be very fast. So first of all, I very much appreciate it. Thanks a lot, Stefan and Frederic, right, for your comments. Let me be very fast. So about 2 questions of Stefan, why it should be better now? It's actually you replied already. We are now more aware. We see more that the environmental problem is something that's just in front of us. It's not somewhere in the future. It's here, and we observe this. And at the same time, we're in a situation of crisis. As I said, crisis is rebuilding. So in this rebuilding case, I think we can do this. And I can give an example of the program of Morocco, Le Pacte pour la relance économique de l'emploi. It was signed in August this year, and they exactly what they're doing. They're actually restarting some things with a huge impact of environmental issues. So I think it's a possible way to do it in this situation. And the second question you asked about the cooperation, actually you're absolutely right. In some sense, I was thinking about this in doing this. I was thinking about from the particular view of the country, thinking about countries who are kind of closed. But you are right that one of the next things, it's things about the regional cooperation. And personally, I think there is a huge possibility, a huge potential of this cooperation. So you're right, obvious, for sure. And for your future research, you mentioned that's exactly what I'm working a bit right now, because environmental issues is something that we have this poverty problem, and sometimes environment is for rich. That exists in literature, in reality. So how to make these environmental issues to be benefited, we can benefit from all level and all people. That's the point that I'm working right now. So you're definitely targeting the point. Thanks a lot. And for Frederick, thanks a lot for your comments, for your feedback on the work. I do think that, first of all, I very appreciate a lot that you mentioned circular economy models, because I think it's one of the win-win, exact win-win that you're saying, win-win situation that might be developed in the region. And about value chains as well, I think I'm missing it in my brief, so I should have been doing that as well. You're right. And about their new approaches, yes, that's maybe the most difficult case. In one of the questions that was done in the chat, what's the difference between this, what we are saying and what we are doing? And this is this gap we observe in between, that what we need to find out how to bridge, actually. Thanks a lot. I'm deeply sorry, but I really need to run. So I really much appreciate, thanks a lot, and thanks for your comments. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Vera. And so maybe Harmin, if you want to jump to the discussion and to answer the question.
Yes, thank you very much. And I think we are pretty much on the same page in regard to this question. And yes, from my perspective, one additional interesting element now coming up. On the one hand side, we are discussing the COVID-19 response. We are discussing green recovery approaches, green stimulus packages. And on the other hand side, we are also observing this race to zero. And it means there is now a sizable number of big economies, Japan, South Korea, the UK, who are now actually envisaging a zero carbon economy towards the mid-century. And this will have a huge impact, of course, on the global economy, on the competitiveness of goods and so on. And the same, of course, goes for the European Union. So the question is not anymore, are we going to decarbonize? Are we going to use this opportunity now for the crisis to decarbonize? But how fast are we going to decarbonize? And who is first in providing offering new services, offering new technological solutions, and so on? So the race is really increasing, and I think this is a big challenge for the countries in the Mediterranean. But at the same time, of course, an opportunity, given the huge number of young people with bright ideas, a lot of innovation, and so on. So it's a question: how fast can we get rid of fossil fuels? How fast can we get rid of the old economy? Is now very high on the political agenda in many places. And this is not just a singular country somewhere, but a sizable number of economies worldwide. And this will have a major impact on the future debate.
Okay, thank you, to be short enough. And so like that, I will close this session. Just maybe to say that this is a real challenge, as you all mentioned, but by the way, this is also something we need to not underestimate. So just to give an example, keep in mind the Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, which is all the cooperative, let's say, approach, the carbon issue, and all the market mechanisms. And you remember that in Madrid, we disagree. And this year, we have no work on this issue. This is still exactly at the same position that in the previous one. So we have 1 year to work only on this issue, which is just to exchange carbon, to put a price on the market. So as soon as we speak about technology, about transfrontier arrangement, we will need to keep in mind that at the end, if we don't have an agreement, a political one, it will be at country level, we will need to deal. And maybe for Africa level, there will be a market at the end, or why not in the Mediterranean area? So just to say, this is a very challenging, very exciting period. So I will close this session now. I will give back the words to Constantin, and thank you all the panelists and all the questionnaires. And so far, this is, I think, no, Maryse, you are the ones to take the lead. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Stefan. Yes, so I will give the floor to Maryse. We move on to the third session. So we had 2 sessions that were more regional specific. Now let's go to the country specific implications. How are the population handling the whole COVID situation? What are governments doing? So we will focus on three specific countries: Egypt, Lebanon, and Tunisia. And we're happy to have here with us Maryse Louis, who will be moderating this session. Maryse Louis, that you all know, she's the general manager of FEMISE. So she will be moderating, and there will also be a discussion with Patricia Augier, that you also all know, professor at Aix-Marseille Université, and who has done a lot for Mediterranean issues, and more specifically for FEMISE, with all the impulse that she provided during the last 4 years. So without further ado, Maryse, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Constantin. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, so let's start this third session. It has been quite intense, but I think this is a new perspective, and I think it will bring in lots of the issues that other authors touched upon on their thematic view. This is like a country-specific session. So we know that most of the South Mediterranean region, in response to this pandemic, they did act quite rapidly, and this had helped to curb the infection rates and save some lives. However, it's clear that this has put a lot of pressure on the already suffering economies in terms of the social and economic fronts. So this crisis is representing a real test for the resilience of these economies, and the way out of the crisis will really depend on the capacity of the governments to create innovative approaches to provide support packages to both the households and the businesses within their very, very limited resources. So this session, as Constantin said, is all about the country-specific, and we will be hearing from the cases of Egypt, Tunisia, and Lebanon. And they will each present some of the implication of the crisis, how governments have reacted, and what are the recommendations to move forward. So first, I would like to invite Hossein Suleiman. Hossein is a researcher at the Economic Department of the Al-Ahram Center for Political and Strategic Studies. And I will give you 7 minutes, Hossein. I will put on your presentation now.
Good afternoon. It is a pleasure to join this webinar and insightful debate. First of all, I would like to remark that some of the data in this presentation is more updated than that in the policy brief that you have read. Next slide, please. It is worth mentioning in the beginning that during the peak of the global lockdown, the Egyptian government imposed mild lockdown measures to avoid an economic meltdown and a domestic supply shock. Nevertheless, the COVID-19 crisis has affected foreign demand for significant exports and sources of household income, demand, and employment in Egypt, leading to a decline in GDP growth from 5.6% in 2019 to a projected 3.5% in 2020. The most affected sector is tourism, which contributes with 4.3% of GDP and nearly 10% of total employment. The sector's receipts fell by 55% in the first half of this year compared to 2019. And the loss will be higher when the data for the second half is included as well. Suez Canal revenues, which contribute with 2% of GDP, have declined as well during the crisis by 4.4% during the first 10 months of the year. In addition, remittances from Egyptians working abroad, which amount to 8.8% of GDP, is projected to decline by 9% in 2020. Next slide, please. The COVID-19 crisis comes at a crucial time for Egyptian economy and households, as Egypt has just completed an economic reform program with the IMF between 2016 and 2019, which pushed the average annual inflation above 20% for two consecutive years and interest rates to historic levels as well. Thus, national poverty rates increased in Egypt from 27.9% in 2015 before the program to 32.5% in 2018, which is the latest data, with extreme poverty increasing as well from 5.3% to 6.2% during the same period. In addition, along the program's years, informality increased from 51% in 2016 to 55% in 2019, as the formal private sector struggled to add more jobs, while the state was downsizing the number of public employees. This led to a decline in women participation in the workforce from 7 million women in 2016 to only 5 million in 2019. Next slide, please. During the peak of the lockdown in mid-year, the crisis affected the employment conditions of 61.9% of all working Egyptians. Among the affected, 26.2% became unemployed, while the rest worked irregularly or less hours. This means that in mid-year, additional 4.2 million Egyptians were unemployed, which pushed unemployment rate in Egypt then to more than 20%. And since then, it has improved a bit after the lockdown measures were removed in July. Consequently, 73.5% of all working Egyptians saw their income decline during peak lockdown. Youth, females, and the less educated are specifically more vulnerable and more affected by loss of employment and income during the crisis, which is aggravating inequality in Egypt. In addition, the most vulnerable group during the pandemic is informal workers, who constitute more than half of all non-agricultural labor in Egypt, and who lack social safety nets or savings, and who at least 43.1% of them live in poverty. Next slide. In response to the crisis, the Egyptian government dedicated 100 billion pounds as a stimulus and relief package, equal to 1.8% of GDP, with half of the package directed to the tourism sector alone. In addition to cutting taxes for businesses and canceling debt and lowering energy prices for certain sectors. The central bank as well dedicated 100 billion pounds of subsidized loans to the business sector, with no limitations on the size of recipient companies. It also cut the policy rate gradually by 400 basis points. A smaller share of these packages was dedicated to households. The government provided a monthly £500 grant to 1.6 million irregular workers for 4 months, in addition to a cash grant to nearly 300,000 regular workers in tourism and textile industries. The government also raised all pensions by 14% and all public employees' wages by 7 to 12%, and raised the exemption limit for income taxes as well. However, the government is planning to achieve a primary fiscal surplus between 0.5% and 1.4% of GDP during the pandemic to continue its reform track. And it is targeting households in specific to raise more public revenues for this goal. The government raised energy prices for households starting from July, including for the poorest consumer brackets, after cutting the energy prices for businesses during the pandemic. It also started deducting a monthly 1% of the net income of all private and public employees and 0.5% monthly of all pensions to finance the pandemic's response measures. The government also imposed extra fees on several goods and services, including tobacco, cell phones, gasoline, recreational activities, and official documents. Thus, the Egyptian government is raising more revenues from households during the pandemic to support the business sector. And in total, the fiscal cost of the response measures was 0.76% of GDP by mid-2020, with only 0.05% of GDP in direct support to households, while the rest was support to businesses. Meanwhile, additional revenues of 0.56% of GDP are planned, which are almost entirely targeting households. Next slide. Finally, as the government lifted most of lockdown measures in July, simultaneously cut back most relief measures, despite that the crisis is still affecting millions of households. Thus, the government should instead scale up its transfers to affected and vulnerable households, both in terms of number of recipients and amount per recipient, with a special focus on women and informal labor. The government should also be more open to run a fiscal deficit during the crisis in order to finance response measures without burdening households or businesses with more taxes and fees during the crisis. In addition, the government should also consider redistributing part of its stimulus package away from businesses and to households and vulnerable groups. And on a longer term, the government should increase its spending on underfunded public education. It should also work on integrating informal labor into social safety nets, reforming the domestic business environment and regulations, and setting a clear agenda for digital transformation in order to stimulate economic growth and job creation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hussein, for a very good presentation. It just gives us a bit of a feel of how the government has actually responded. First impression, obviously, is that the household did suffer more than the businesses. And this is something we will be discussing at the end. Now I would like to ask Hajar to join. So I'm just going to stop this. Hajar?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
Hi.
So Hajar El-Wardani, she is an associate professor at the Higher School of Economics and Commercial Sciences of Tunis at the University of Tunis. And she will present to us her brief about the case of Tunisia. And I'm going to put it on the screen now.
Can I share my screen? Oh, it's okay. It's okay. Thank you. So thank you very much, Maryse. Thank you, Constantin, and thank you to FEMISE and CMI for this opportunity. So, and really, let me express my pleasure to be with you this afternoon. So the situation, the question of the COVID in Tunisia, my policy brief aims to identify measures that, on the one hand, would contribute to mobilization of resources, and in the second hand, to stimulate the Tunisian economy. So please, can you move, Maryse? So my first, my policy brief will be summarized in 4 points. The first one is the pandemic crisis hit the country at the time it had been suffering from increasing economic difficulties, the rising public debt, the increasing of budget and the current account deficit, and the depreciation of the dinar, the declining rate of growth, and the rising of level of employment. So hence, a part of the health consequence of the COVID, the major economic challenge in Tunisia faces is how to address the significant additional internal and external financial problem. This pandemic has imposed on already sustained governmental budget. I must note that by the end of 2020, the budget deficit is estimated to reach about 6% of GDP, while external debt is expected to stand at more than 100% of GDP. And I should note that more of 2/3 of this debt is dominated by foreign currency. So this policy brief outlined a set of short-term and longer-term measures that I believe authority can call upon to undertake if the COVID challenge is to be met with full success. So the short term, please, Maryse. Maryse, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, Hajar, it's on. Can you see it? Short-term measures, is this the one?
I'm sorry, yeah, I have a problem with my screen. So short-term measures. So the first will be divided in 2 measures. The first one is authorities should consider the protection of large companies operating in the industrial sector. Equally, support should be extended to SMEs that are the real lever of the Tunisian economy. And I must note that 93% of our companies are SMEs. So the second one is the authorities should ensure that the medium-term credit and grant intended to strengthen the capacity of the health sector and to protect vulnerable businesses and households from the impact of the COVID-19 crisis are being used optimally. And I think this might be accomplished by placing the funds in an account audited by a specialized committee made up by donors, civil society, and responsive and the government, representative of the government. So the larger or the longer term measures. The other slide, please, Marise. Can you move? Will be divided in three, related to finance, health, and how to help economy to move on. So the first one related to finance, provide bank what is done. So provided the BCT, the central bank, provided banks with the necessary liquidity and required the BCT's key and lowered the BCT key interest rate, but I think it's not enough. But my proposal can be divided, or I can propose four proposals. The first one is the suspend of distribution of dividends, especially for banks, for 2020. The second one, thank you very much. So the second, can you move to the, Marise? Okay, no, the longer term. So the second one, unconventional measures must be taken by the central bank. Social finance instruments to help improve public social services, and sustainable finance instruments such as participatory finance and social impact bonds and microfinance. For the second measure, second type of measures are related to health, especially to the Tunisia government must invest in public health sector. Can we move to the other? Yeah, thank you. The third type of measures are related to stimulate the national economy, promote the mobility of employees in the public sector toward activity and region experiencing a labor shortage in order to ensure better allocation of resource among with the implementation of other measures to enhance productivity. Reform educational, scientific research and vocational training. The government should maintain and adapt hundreds of kilometers of railway lines to current standards. This can connect region. This can facilitate connection between the different regions. The digitalization to all sectors and economic activities in order to ensure the traceability of operation and fight against corruption. And the last one is the modernization of the agricultural sector. So in my conclusion, I can, please, Marise, in conclusion, I can say, Marise, so the implementation of my conclusion, the implementation of the proposed measures would require proper policy coordination between the fiscal and monetary authorities. They would also require that the sovereign state regain its role in the fields of social security and in the realization of the public-private duality in all sectors, health, education, transport, etc., ensuring social and economic equity and equality. The other point of my conclusion, more effective international cooperation is needed to combating this pandemic, while economic collaboration should also be promoted. So thank you very much for your attention. And Marise?
Thank you very much for your presentation. Sorry, the slides were a bit slow. It was really good. Thank you. It was clear. So we see that in the Tunisian case, even though the governments did quite a lot to reduce the impact, we still, the country still suffered from deficits and from balancing issues. So let's move to the third case, which is the case of Lebanon. I am not sure Jamal or Aman are going to make the presentation. Aman?
Good morning. Actually, hi, I'm Rosette Khalil. I'm a researcher working with Prof. Jamal and Amal.
Excellent. So welcome, and I'm going just to put your presentation on. Okay. Oops. There we go. Can you see it? Is it good?
Firstly, we have Lebanon in the middle of multiple crises, hope born out of despair. So firstly, concerning the socio-economic and political features of Lebanon, we have to talk about successive severe crises that happened in Lebanon. And more recently, we have to talk about the COVID-19 pandemic that started in March 2020, that occurred while the country were struggling to move on from so many crises represented by economic and political crises. In addition to that, we have to talk about, while talking about the system in Lebanon, we have to talk about the complex system in Lebanon related to the religious system. So it's quite difficult in Lebanon. So we have to talk that the majority of seats in parliament are related to the religious system. And it can be paralyzing concerning the decision-making policy process and the corruption practices. In addition to that, we have to see in Lebanon a gap concerning the presidency. The presidency was vacant for 2 consecutive years due to the lack of political consecutive on a successor to Michel Suleiman, whose term ended in 2014. So for the period from 2014 until 2016, we can see in Lebanon a gap concerning the presidency, and that affect really the whole system in Lebanon. It was quite paralyzing in terms of for the ministers, for all the things that related to the management in Lebanon. In addition to the most important things that happening in Lebanon for the last, from 2020, we have deterioration in the country, really in terms of infrastructure related to the water, related to the electricities, in addition to the trash crisis that start in 2015, and the problem with the companies related to that. So until now, for 20 years, we are suffering from these problems. And as a result, as a consequences, we have a revolution that happened in October, especially a serious revolution that happened in October 2019. That in order to fight the non-transparency in Lebanon and the corruption and the low or the high level of poverty and employment in Lebanon. So we're talking about Lebanon, we have to talk about high level on transparency. When we want to compare it to the Arab countries as well as the whole world, we have a high level of unemployment in Lebanon. Allô? Vous m'entendez? Oui. We have a high level of... Hello?
Oui, Rosette, on t'entend. Vas-y, continue.
Désolée, okay. Sorry, il y avait un problème. Okay, so there's a high level of unemployment represented by 37%, in addition to the high level of debt in Lebanon and the interest on the debt, the domestic debt and the international debt. It's around an estimated by 150% of the GDP. So you can move on, please. So prior to this COVID-19 pandemic, that we can see the negative effects on the GDP, the decline in terms of economic growth. In addition to the political instabilities in Lebanon, we now, especially we have a high increase in terms of poverty, especially between 2018 until 2020, when this line concerning the poverty and the poverty rate is estimated by around 55% of the whole population in May 2020. So after that, after all this crisis that happened in Lebanon, we have the negligence of the managers, of the ministers in Lebanon, that leads to an explosion in recently in August 2020, and killed more than 2,000 people and left more than 300,000 of people without home and in the street, unfortunately. And we can say that accordingly, economically speaking, we can talk about a severe deterioration in terms of the Lebanese pound when we want to compare to the USD, to the US dollars, by a depreciation by around 80% of its real value, and a low, at a high level of non-trust in the Lebanese currency. So we have also so many problems, economically speaking, concerning the transfer, concerning the worldwide, for the people living in Lebanon and for the people living outside Lebanon, the consequences. Can you move, please? So while talking about the research project here, we have to say after that we have suffering in Lebanon from economic difficulties combined with political, social crisis, altogether leading, as we said, to low confidence and high level of uncertainty during to this crisis. So we can, for economists and policymakers and observers, we have to ask so many questions concerning the question which can be relate between the confidence and uncertainty. They can play an important role as drivers of economic fluctuations. So accordingly, we can examine with the measure used as proxy of economic sentiment of the Lebanese population can be, or the anxiety can be used a diagnosis on changes in the economic outlook in Lebanon. So can you move, please? So concerning our data and methodology, we have data as a reference from the Google Trends platform. So we're talking about Google Trends platforms. We are talking about the word used of recession, or the word used recession on Google. So here we have as robustness the Wikipedia. The search volume of crisis-related keywords can well represent a fearful attitude toward the economic situation, and we will use control variables in order to explain the economic growth. In particular, we have the investment, remittance, trade openness, credit to private sector for the period from Q1 2010 until Q2 2020. And we have monthly Google Trends for the keyword recession, as I said, use a supplementary predictor of the growth. So we'll move on to the graphic here. So as a description, we have here the evolution of the economic growth of GDP and Google Trends. So we have to, we can say it will allow us, by doing that, it will allow us to measure the level of anxiety of the Lebanese population. Especially now we are talking about a normal situation in Lebanon. So we have consecutive crises on so many levels, as I said. So it's considered as an explicative variable when we want to compare it to other economic variables. So from this period, 2010 until 2020, we can conclude that for this period we have high correlation between the two variables. So by taking the variable into consideration, we can increase the quality of this model So it's quite interesting for us to talk about this, especially that the situation in Lebanon, as I said, is not fatal in all the aspects. So accordingly, we can conclude concerning that our results confirm, please. Our results confirm that taking sentiment of the Lebanese into consideration would improve the forecast of quarter growth in a certain context. Secondly, we have to talk about the COVID. We're talking about the COVID. It's an unpredictable crisis that happened in addition to enter in the basket of the crisis in Lebanon and the political aspect, on the economic aspect, on the political and the social aspect in Lebanon. So it's not considered a normal time for Lebanon, for this country that is witnessing a crisis on the top of so many crises. So accordingly, we highly recommend exceptional solutions and recommendations such as structural reforms accompanied by economic reforms, by direct and indirect aids to people in needs and most vulnerable, including working with the informal economy, in addition to international aids and private investment that can be very essential for comprehensive, for a really recovery and reconstruction in Lebanon, in addition to the most important system reform in Lebanon, which is really related to the complex system in terms of politics in Lebanon. Because in Lebanon, we are entering a vicious cycle in Lebanon because the system itself is related to the religion system. So accordingly, we highly recommend that we take responsibilities. We have to rely on the skills, on qualified people, in addition to intensify the effort in terms or the area of administration and financial areas by adoption of competency and merit-based and transparent recruitment practice. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rosette, for your presentation, which also your research was contributed with Jamal Bouyour, Rifq Selmi, and Aman Muftah. It's a very interesting approach. It's a new approach to try and forecast the GDP with the sentiment. Of course, there's a lot of questions that could be asked. And to the way you gave the overview on the Lebanon economy just gives more questions on how will the Lebanese manage, as usual, to get out of this very complicated situation. So I'm not going to take long. I'm just going to ask if you have any questions, please put them on the message screen, and I will ask Patricia, who is going to give her comments on the three policy briefs to come in. Pat?
Yes.
Okay.
It's okay. I think my camera doesn't run.
It's okay. We will just hear you.
So doesn't matter, I think. It's okay like this? It's
yeah,
okay?
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay.
We will hear.
So thank you very much for this invitation. Thank you very much, CMI and FEMISE. It's a pleasure to read and comment this three policy brief, and thank you very much for the quality of the presentation. These three policy briefs are complementary. Hussein for Egypt focuses on the effects on the COVID crisis on households. Rosette is more specifically interested in the growth. No, sorry, yes, it's a Rosette. In the growth rate in the case of Lebanon, and Ager focuses more on the external debt and the public deficit in Tunisia. Their common point is to show that in these three countries, to a greater or lesser degree, the COVID crisis aggravates an already difficult situation. In the case of Egypt, Hussein shows that the measures put in place over the last 3 years have had the effect of increasing poverty rates before the COVID crisis. Hussein also shows that these negative effects of the COVID on households are particularly important because the government has given more support to business rather than to households. This policy brief is very informative, and thank you very much, Hussein. I have a question on a point of detail in your work because it's a theme that interests me in particular. You write that female employment was specifically affected as female tends more to work in the formal sector. And this explanation is not very convincing for me because I had in mind that the informal sector was much more affected by COVID than the formal sector. But anyway, because typically the question of whether the COVID has affected more women in Mediterranean countries is to be put on the agenda for future research. Personally, I have tried with the latest available household data to address this question, but the information is not yet enough in this database for the moment. So I wanted to ask you, Hussein, if you have worked on this issue in the case of Egypt. Concerning the priority issues to be put on the future research agenda, it's clear from your policy brief that a lot of work needs to be done on the social aspects. Another point to put in the agenda is the development of digitalization, particularly in relation to improving health and social policies. The implementation in India of the unique social identifier is a good example of the effectiveness of digitalization to better target the populations that should receive social assistance. In Lebanon too, the COVID has come to aggravate a deep economic, financial, and I will add food crisis. For a long time since Keynes, more precisely, we have known that in a situation of uncertainty, the anticipation of the agents have a very important impact on the activity, on the economic activity. Given the situation of Lebanon, we can assume that the economic sentiment of the Lebanese population partly determines the growth rate. The originality of the approach of my colleague Jamal and these co-authors is to use Google Trends data as a proxy for the economic sentiment of the population. More precisely, they assume that the more there are searches for keywords related to the crisis, the more there is a lack of confidence in the economy. So my questions are focused on the use of this indicator of the frequencies of keyword searches. First, how is the shift in the value of this indicator, which is normalized, of course, from, by example, -1 to 0 or from 0 to 1 interpreted? Second, how many keywords did you use, and is there a symmetry? That means, did you test for the frequency of positive keywords, for example, recovery or crisis exit or so on, and so on? Third, it's not clear to me if you have a positive or negative relationship between the frequency of keywords that give a negative feeling and the change in GDP. Fourth, there is age endogeneity bias. What I mean is that you have tested the link between population sentiment and growth rate, assuming that the link goes from population sentiment to growth rate, but you can't eliminate the possibility that this link could also go in the opposite direction. The population sentiment can be influenced by growth rates. So my question is, do the results hold when you try to control for this endogeneity bias? In any case, this policy brief shows there is a very interesting field of research about how to change the confidence and state of mind of the population of Mediterranean countries, especially in order to stimulate the private sector. In her policy brief on Tunisia, Ager shows the impact of the COVID crisis on growth, employment, and deficit, and considers that the authorities have been less successful in dealing with the consequences of the second wave of the pandemic. One of the main interests of this work is to focus on the issue, on the depth of Mediterranean countries, and its real issue for the international community. Another interest of this policy brief is also the large number of recommendations made by Asher, distinguishing between short-term and longer-term recommendations. My questions are the following. First, can you tell us why the measures taken have not been successful in dealing with this second wave? Maybe the measures are inappropriate, or maybe the measures are well, but the problem is the level of funds. I don't know exactly. Second, among your short-term recommendation, you don't talk a lot about the social component. Is it because you think that the social measures are sufficient in Tunisia? And third, you don't mention the issue of informality, and I would like to have your point of view on how to deal with this issue in the context of COVID. In my point of view, the informality, and more precisely, the understanding of the impact of COVID on the sector must also be on this on the research agenda. In a more general way, the reading of this policy brief refers basically to the problem of debt in developing and emerging countries, which is exploding. It will be necessary to reflect on more effective tools to deal with future waves of debt restructuring. Consequently, in my point of view, it's crucial that the international community and the community of researchers, of course, reflect on new measures to improve debt renegotiation. Sorry. So I think it's time to stop here. Thank you very much again for this three policy brief. Thank you, Maryse.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Patricia, for a very elaborate and very important comments. I will just add a few comments before I give the floor to the authors to respond. So for the Egypt case, I'm just wondering, you talk about the structural reforms, and you say that already the households and the social aspects of the economy were suffering because of these reforms that were implemented by the IMF. So again, in the case of in the crisis, it seems like the households were the one to pay the price. So is this impression correct? And if so, what is your recommendation? You've already talked about cash transfers, but do you think this is enough to bring in the households back, you know, at the level that will get them out of the poverty? For Hajar, I'm just thinking about, again, I'm joining Patricia with some of the comments she gave. And what is it for the households in Tunisia? Do you think what the government is doing is enough, and how to bring forward this this to the agenda of the government? And finally, for the case of Lebanon, well, it's much more complicated. The country has gone through a lot of challenges. My thinking is that maybe the way out is to have some international aid from the World Bank, the IMF. I know that there have been some negotiations with the governments of Lebanon on this, but of course, the issue of the political situation is on the table. And I'm wondering how, in your view, this vicious circle could be, Lebanon can get out of this vicious circle. So I'm going to give the floor to each one for 5 minutes. We're running a bit late, but I think it's worth listening to you. And Hossein, I'm giving you the floor first to respond. Thank you.
Thank you, Maris, and thank you, Patricia, for the comments. First of all, regarding the women employment and informality, actually, it's not only post-COVID as the policy brief shows. The effect of the reform program during the 3 years was that if you see during the 3 years, 800,000 new jobs were created in the job market in Egypt, with 600,000 of them only in the construction sector, which is predominantly male sector and informal sector, while the state, the public employment declined, and the formal private sector was unable to provide more jobs. This is the mechanism through how women, not only women employment, but women participation in labor declined during these 3 years. And actually, if you see the data, the latest data post COVID-19 for the third quarter of 2020, you'll see that the aggregate levels of employment reached in the third quarter its pre-COVID-19 levels of the beginning of 2020. However, the composition changed. Additional 500,000 women dropped out of the labor force. So now we are talking about 4.5 million women in the labor force in the third quarter of 2020, compared to 7 million in just as the onset of the reform program in 2016. So this is, according to the data we have, this is highly related to the increase in informality during these years, because the data shows that women tend to be directed more to the formal labor, whether in the public sector or the private sector. The other comment regarding the development of digitalization, actually the COVID crisis highlighted how inadequate the digital infrastructure in Egypt is, specifically as the government tried to rely on digital technologies for educational purposes during the few months of lockdown, because educational institutions were one of the few institutions that were completely closed during the lockdown. So the government tried to rely heavily on it with inadequate coverage and inadequate quality of the digital infrastructure. So I think the COVID-19 would be a push towards digitalization. The last point regarding the recommendations to relieve effects on households post-COVID-19, actually the trend during the reform years, or even during previous reform waves in Egypt from 2004 to 2010 also, show that the Egyptian government tend to rely on some sort of a non-inclusive growth policy. It favors aggregate growth. It favors some reforms for businesses, some incentives for businesses. However, it does not put the households as a priority, whether during the COVID-19, whether during the reform program, or the 2004 to 2010 reform waves. So the point will be to, on the short run, the priority will be to more cash transfers, more urgent support to the most vulnerable, informal labor, to women, to people in rural regions. However, on the long run, there has to be some sort of a radical change towards more social spending on education, on health, and more on training, on preparing people for the digital transformation, and more on social safety nets that has deteriorated during the last 20 years. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hussein, for your input. Very convincing. I'm going to give the floor now to Hajar to respond to some of the issues that were raised. Hajar, you have 5 minutes.
Yeah. So for the first question, why measures are not success in the second wave? For the first wave, the distanciation was really the key of the success of the containing of the COVID, the pandemic. At the first, the government and the central bank allowed the necessary financial to help companies and households. So for the 3 months, first months, it was okay. The problem was for the second wave. For the second wave, really, the government of Tunisian suffer of the lack of deficit budget, and there is no really financial to ensure to help companies, especially companies and some sectors, especially service, restaurant. So that's why it was the distanciation. It wasn't possible in the second wave of the pandemic. So this is the first question. For the short-term recommendation, social measures are insufficient because of the lack of public, because of the lack of public finance. The problem is the government have not a lot of finance to help household and to put social measures to help and to contain the effect of this pandemic, and to help the household and the vulnerable companies. So this is really a big problem in Tunisia. The third one is about the third question is about the informal sector. The informal sector is very important in Tunisia. 44%, I think, about employment is ensured in the informal sector. So the problem that we haven't data about specific data about all the person that works in the informal sector. So that's why all the measures took by the government. I'm sorry for the third question. I think I don't remember exactly what's the third question of Patricia. I will answer the fourth one of Mary's. Measures took to help household in Tunisia are not enough. That's it. So the problem is that the government haven't data about all the vulnerable family and household that was in need. So it was not possible to help this class vulnerable. The second one is the lack of course, of finance. And there is really, I think the Tunisian government doesn't use the good way to help directly these households. So that's why really in the second wave, the situation is really, I think it's very, very critic, and the situation is very critic, and now the priority of government must be turned to the help of these classes, and just to really the poor classes and the vulnerable classes are really in a critic situation actually. So thank you very much, and
thank you, Haniger. Thank you for your responses. Now I'm going to invite Jamal Bouyour, who would like to make his responses to the issue of Lebanon. Jamal?
Yes, thank you. I am here. Thank you, Maris, Constantin, and Patricia for the quality of organization. In this paper, we have, we use in this paper the platform Google Trend, and also for robustness, Wikipedia and Twitter. The idea behind this is in the context of instability and volatility, it's hard to give good estimation, good forecasting, and good prediction of growth, because the variables are volatile and unstable. We have a lot of estimation of growth. For example, we have some estimation from the government, from World Bank and other institutions. But all estimations are different and change from all time. So it is not a good idea to use traditional data for forecasting. In this paper, we used keywords like recession, crisis, and we found a negative relationship between growth and these keywords. For the technical problem, for example, the problem of endogeneity, it's a good question. We have used two least square to resolve this problem. And finally, the use of this Google Translate platform increased the quality of our model. It is important for us to use such platform because it's a proxy of the anxiety of the population. And to clarify our paper and to have more robustness, we use other platform and we have the same results that prove that our result is robust. Is important for us to use the big data because this instrument increase the quality of estimation in this situation where the variables are very, very volatile. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamal, for giving some more details about the use of the data. Rosette, do you have anything to add?
No, as Prof. Jamal explained everything very well.
Okay, perfect. So I think I will just wrap up this session. It's clear that even though governments in these countries tried their best to do whatever it takes to come out of this pandemic and the crisis, it's clear that this pandemic could be used as a way to renovate, to rethink about the reforms, and to try and include the households, the firms. It's a big challenge, and we would just wanted to make some contribution with the policy briefs. I would like to thank the panelists and who participated. I would like to thank Patricia for her comments, and I will give back the floor to Constantin to wrap up and give us the forward-looking subjects. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maryse, for a great session. Thank you to the panelists. Well, thank you, everyone. Actually, we have appreciated the engagement that you have all contributed to this webinar. It's an event that has been proactive in coming to grips with important changes that are taking place in the region and around the world. So we have gained a better understanding of the challenges raised by COVID and on ways forward, whether it be with regards putting in place new financial instruments, digitalization, cooperating on environmental taxation, managing the crisis implication on households, and so on. A key word that was mentioned throughout most presentation was the one of cooperation, the need for more cooperation. And indeed, in the Mediterranean, cooperation will be a key factor for development post-COVID. So we've seen that the spread of the virus affects policies, affects processes that are related to trade, to investment, to migration, to food security, to climate change, and so on. So it's with that in mind that we will soon launch a second competition for policy briefs. So we'll continue this fruitful cooperation between CMI and FEMISE. And this competition will be open to all researchers who are invited to submit their drafts. And we will encourage briefs that apply this cooperation dimension, meaning how can Med countries cooperate in dealing with a specific issue related to COVID. We will encourage briefs that offer elements of comparison across the Mediterranean countries as well, and if possible with other regions. And among the themes that we would like to see explored, some of these are, for instance, post-COVID reforms and strategies to accelerate a clean energy future in the Mediterranean, something that we would like to see. The potential of social entrepreneurship for growth and jobs post-COVID, how we can capitalize on the EU-Mediterranean-Africa axis, regional strategies to attract FDI, but also issues related to the youth who face increased unemployment, and issues related to gender inequality and unemployment among women. So these are some of the issues that we would like to see, without excluding, of course, other proposals that will be made. The guidelines for the second round of policy briefs will be made available quite soon on the CMI and FEMISE website. So with that being said, I would like to thank the technical and comm teams who did a great work both today and in preparing for the workshop during the last days. So big thanks to Fabien, Zain, Thalia, Pasen from FEMISE as well. Well done for your work. Many thanks to the moderators, to the discussants for their valuable comments as well, for their input as to what future research could include. I would like to express my gratitude to you all for connecting, for sharing your thoughts. A recording of this workshop will be made available online in the coming days for those who wish to rewatch it. And well, hopefully next time we meet, we can hopefully do it in person. Until then, stay safe and à bientôt. Thank you.
Thank you, Constantin. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.